Here's the first part of the story in approximately 800 words, written in third person with simple, basic English. The cold wind whistled through the narrow streets of Millbrook, a small industrial town where hope seemed to fade like the old factory chimneys in the distance. Emma Thompson stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, watching the gray morning light creep across the worn cobblestone street. Her father, Robert, sat in his favorite armchair, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he tried to fold a newspaper. At 68, he looked older than his years, the weight of lost dreams and fading memories etched deep into his face. Dementia was slowly stealing away the man who had once been the strongest support in Emma's life. Life had not been kind to the Thompsons. The factory that had supported their town for generations had closed 3 years ago, leaving most of the community jobless and desperate. Emma worked 2 jobs just to keep their small house running, cleaning offices during the day and waiting tables at night. Her dreams of going to university had long since been packed away, replaced by the urgent need to survive. Every morning, Emma would help her father dress, make his breakfast, and ensure he took his medications. Sometimes he would recognize her completely, telling stories about the town's better days. Other times he would look at her with confusion, his mind wandering through memories that no longer made sense. "Remember the promise, Emma," Robert would often say, his voice becoming clear for just a moment. "We must always look after each other." These words had become a lifeline for Emma. Despite the exhaustion, despite the constant struggle, she held on to her father's wisdom. The promise wasn't just about their family, it was about their entire community. Millbrook had become a shadow of its former self. Empty shops lined the main street, windows covered in faded posters and dust. Young people left as soon as they could, seeking opportunities in bigger cities. But Emma had chosen to stay, to fight, to hope. One particularly cold morning, while sorting through the mail, Emma discovered a small flyer for a community center program. Free skills training, it promised. Job support, computer classes. Her heart began to race. This could be the opportunity they needed. The community center was a small building, once a school, now repurposed to help the struggling town. When Emma walked in, she felt a mix of hope and nervousness. The room was filled with people like her, tired, worn, but not completely beaten. A kind-faced woman named Margaret approached her. "First time here?" she asked, her voice warm and understanding. Emma nodded, explaining her situation, caring for her father, working multiple jobs, desperate for a chance to improve their circumstances. Margaret listened carefully. She had seen many like Emma, strong, resilient individuals who refused to give up despite overwhelming challenges. "We can help," she said simply. The training programs were basic but practical. Computer skills, resume writing, small business, management. Emma absorbed everything like a sponge. During her lunch breaks and after her night shifts, she would study, practice, dream. Her father noticed the change. On good days, he would ask about her classes, his eyes bright with a glimpse of his old self. "You're learning," he would say, pride mixing with his fragmented memories. That's how we survive. The town watched Emma with a mixture of curiosity and hope. She wasn't just surviving, she was planning, preparing, believing that something better was possible. At night, after long shifts and study sessions, Emma would sit beside her father's chair. She would hold his hand, tell him about her day, about the classes, about the small seeds of hope she was planting. "We'll be okay," she would whisper, more to herself than to him. "We'll find a way." Outside, Millbrook remained quiet. The factory, chimneys stood as silent witnesses to years of industrial history. But inside the Thompson house, something was changing. A spark of determination. A promise waiting to be fulfilled. Emma didn't know exactly how things would turn out, but she knew she would keep trying, for her father, for her community, for herself. The first step of any journey, she was learning, was simply to begin. The community center became Emma's sanctuary of hope. Morning sunlight filtered through dusty windows as she sat among other eager learners, her notebook open, pencil ready. The room buzzed with a quiet energy of people trying to rebuild their lives. Michael Edwards, a local businessman who had also fallen on hard times, often watched the training sessions. He was different from other businessmen in town, weathered but not defeated, his eyes holding a spark of determination that matched Emma's own. During a computer skills class, Emma struggled with spreadsheets. Her fingers, calloused from years of cleaning and waiting tables, moved hesitantly across the keyboard. The instructor, a patient woman named Linda, noticed Emma's frustration. "Take your time," Linda would say. "Everyone learns differently." Michael observed Emma's persistence. While other students became discouraged and dropped out, she stayed late, practiced harder, asked questions. Her commitment was unlike anything he had seen in years. One afternoon during a break, Michael approached Emma. "You're working harder than anyone here," he said, offering her a cup of tea from the center's small kitchen. Emma felt nervous. She wasn't used to talking to successful-looking businessmen. "Just trying to make things better," she replied quietly. Michael shared his own story. Once a successful factory owner, he had lost everything when the main industry collapsed. But, instead of giving up, he had reinvented himself. He saw something special in Emma, a resilience that reminded him of his younger self. "Your father must be proud," Michael mentioned, noticing the photograph of Robert she kept in her notebook. Emma's eyes softened. "He doesn't always remember things now, but he always told me about keeping promises to our community." Over the next weeks, Michael began mentoring Emma. He taught her about business planning, financial management, and community development. Emma absorbed every piece of advice like a thirsty plant drinking rainwater. Her father, Robert, would listen to her stories. Each evening, on good days, he would squeeze her hand. "You're doing it," he would say, his voice filled with pride. "You're keeping our promise." The community center became more than just a learning space. It was a place of transformation. Emma learned not just technical skills, but something more important: how to believe in herself. Her small business plan began to take shape, a cooperative that would provide jobs for unemployed community members. It seemed impossible, but Emma had learned that impossible was just a word. Michael introduced her to local council members, helping her understand bureaucracy and networking. Emma practiced her presentation skills, her confidence growing with each attempt. At home, she would sit with her father explaining her dreams. "We're going to help people," she would tell him. Sometimes he would understand, other times he would simply smile. The town began to notice changes in Emma. The quiet girl who cleaned offices and waited tables was transforming. She attended workshops, networked with local business owners, and slowly built a support system. Her plan wasn't just about making money. It was about restoring dignity to a community that had lost hope. She remembered her father's stories about community support, about standing together during difficult times. Winter came bringing cold and uncertainty, but inside the Thompson house and the community center, something warm was growing: hope, determination, and the belief that things could get better. Emma's journey was just beginning. She didn't know exactly where it would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt excited about the future. Her father would look at her sometimes, his eyes clearing for a moment. "You're doing it," he would whisper. "You're keeping our promise." And Emma would smile, knowing that every small step was a step towards something bigger: a promise, a future, a hope. The learning journey had begun, and nothing could stop her now. The wind carried whispers of change through Millbrook's quiet streets. Emma's cooperative idea was like a small seed, waiting to take root in the hard ground of a community that had almost forgotten how to hope. Her first meeting happened in the community center's small back room. 3 people showed up: 2 unemployed factory workers and an older woman who had been cleaning houses for decades. They looked tired, beaten down by years of economic struggle. "We can do something different," Emma said, her voice steady but soft. She spread her handwritten notes across the old wooden table. Her plan was simple: Create a cooperative that would provide cleaning and maintenance services for local businesses and homes. Jack, a former factory worker in his 40s, looked skeptical. "We've heard promises before," he said, his hands rough, "from years of manual labor." Margaret, the older woman, nodded. "Too many empty promises in this town." But Emma didn't get discouraged. She shared stories of her father's teachings about community support. She talked about how they could help each other, create opportunities where none seemed to exist. Michael Edwards continued to support her quietly. He introduced her to local business contacts, helped her understand legal requirements, and provided advice when she felt overwhelmed. The cooperative started small, very small. Their first job was cleaning the local community center. They worked together, learning to trust each other. Jack discovered he was excellent at organizing tasks. Margaret knew every cleaning trick from decades of experience. Word began to spread. A local restaurant needed help with deep cleaning. A small office wanted maintenance support. Each job was a victory, each completed task a statement of their commitment. Emma's father, Robert, would listen to her stories. On good days, he would squeeze her hand. "You're keeping the promise," he would say, his eyes bright with moments of clarity. The town watched carefully. Some people were hopeful, others remained cynical. But Emma kept moving forward, one small step at a time. They created simple rules: fair pay, shared responsibilities, mutual respect. Everyone would have a voice. Everyone would have a chance to contribute. Winter came hard that year. Cold winds swept through Millbrook, bringing additional challenges. But the cooperative grew stronger. They helped each other, supported each other, believed in each other. Local businesses started to notice. Their work was thorough, professional, passionate. They weren't just cleaning, they were rebuilding community trust. Emma worked alongside her team. She wasn't just a manager, she was a worker, a friend, a partner. She learned from Jack's organizational skills. She listened to Margaret's wisdom. She understood that true leadership meant standing together, not standing above. Michael continued, mentoring her, but from a distance now. "You're doing this," he would tell her. "You're creating something real." The cooperative became more than a job. It became a family. People who had lost hope found purpose. People who had been divided found connection. Their first monthly meeting was a celebration. They had completed 10 jobs. They had earned enough to support 3 families. They had proved that something was possible in a town that had almost forgotten how to dream. Jack, who had been so skeptical at the beginning, now spoke with pride. "We're doing something special," he would say. Margaret would smile, her hands, once only known for cleaning, now symbolizing rebuilding and hope. Emma thought about her father's stories, about promises, about community, about never giving up. Some nights, she would sit with Robert, telling him about their progress. Sometimes he would understand, sometimes he would just smile. But always, always, he would hold her hand. The cooperative was small, the changes were slow, but they were real. They were happening. In a town that had lost its way, something beautiful was growing, one job at a time, one day at a time, one promise at a time. The cooperative grew slowly but steadily, like a quiet revolution spreading through Millbrook. Emma's determination had transformed from a whisper to a steady voice that could not be ignored. Local council members began to take notice. What started as a small group of unemployed workers cleaning offices had become something more, a beacon of hope in a town that had nearly forgotten how to believe in itself. Michael Edwards continued to support Emma, introducing her to potential investors and community leaders. He saw something special in her approach, not just a business plan, but a genuine commitment to community healing. One cold morning, the cooperative received its biggest challenge yet. The local hospital needed a comprehensive cleaning and maintenance contract. This was more than just a job. It was a chance to prove themselves to the entire town. Jack, who had become Emma's most trusted team member, looked nervous. "This is big," he said, studying the contract details. Margaret, now the team's expert in cleaning techniques, simply nodded. "We can do this," she said firmly. The team worked harder than they ever had before. They prepared meticulously, understanding that this contract could change everything. Emma spent nights reviewing every detail, creating systems that would ensure their success. Her father, Robert, was having more difficult days now. His memory was fading, but he would still smile when Emma talked about their work. "You're keeping the promise," he would sometimes whisper, holding her hand. The hospital contract was a turning point. Their work was so impressive that other local institutions began to take notice. The local school, the community center, small businesses, they all started requesting their services. Emma's innovative approach became their strength. Fair wages, shared responsibilities, genuine care for each team member. These were not just words, but a way of working. The cooperative wasn't just about cleaning. It was about rebuilding dignity. Local newspapers began to write about them. "Millbrook's Hope," one headline read. Emma felt both proud and overwhelmed. This was never about fame. It was about keeping a promise, about helping her community. The team grew. More unemployed workers joined, finding not just a job but a family. They supported each other, learned together, grew together. Jack, who had been so skeptical at the beginning, now spoke with passion about their mission. Michael Edwards watched with pride. He had seen many business ventures, but this was different. This was about more than money. This was about healing a community. Winter turned to spring. The town began to look different. More businesses opened. More people found hope. The cooperative became a symbol of what was possible when people worked together. Emma's father had more quiet days now. His health was declining, but his spirit remained strong. On good days, he would look at Emma with such love and pride that words were unnecessary. The local council invited Emma to speak about community development. She talked not about herself, but about the team, about how ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they worked together. Their success brought challenges. Bigger companies tried to compete. Some local businesses felt threatened. But the cooperative's reputation was built on something more powerful than competition: genuine care and commitment. Michael helped Emma navigate these challenges. He taught her about business strategies, about standing firm in their values. "You're creating something special," he would tell her. The cooperative now employed 15 people, 15 families that had hope again, 15 stories of transformation. Jack, Margaret, and others who had once felt forgotten now had purpose. Emma thought about her father's stories, about promises, about community, about never giving up. Every job they completed was a tribute to those lessons. Some nights, she would sit with Robert, telling him about their progress. Sometimes he would understand, sometimes he would just smile. But always, always, he would hold her hand. The barriers were breaking, not just in business but in how people saw themselves and their community. One job at a time, one day at a time, one promise at a time. Millbrook was changing, and at the heart of that change was a simple promise: a determined woman and a team that had refused to give up. 2 years had passed since Emma first dreamed of her cooperative. Millbrook looked different now. Streets that were once empty now bustled with life. Hope painted across the faces of people who had almost forgotten how to smile. The cooperative had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. 50 stable jobs, local businesses recovering, a community transformed. What had started as a small dream in a tiny room was now a beacon of possibility. Robert's health had declined. He spent most of his time in a small care home, his memories becoming more fragmented with each passing month. But on his 75th birthday, something magical happened. Emma arranged a special celebration at the community center. The entire cooperative came. Local business owners, council members, people whose lives had been changed by their work. Michael Edwards watched from the corner, pride shining in his eyes. He had seen many business ventures, but nothing like this. This was more than a business. It was a rebirth. Jack, who had once been the most skeptical team member, now spoke with passion about their journey. Margaret, with her years of wisdom, shared stories of how they had changed not just jobs but lives. Robert sat in a special chair, surrounded by people who represented the promise he had spoken about for so many years. Though his mind wandered, there were moments of stunning clarity. "You kept the promise," he whispered to Emma, squeezing her hand. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the weight of those words. This was about more than a business. This was about community, about hope, about never giving up. Emma's cooperative had become a model for other struggling towns. Local councils from nearby areas came to learn about their approach. Universities asked to study their unique community development strategy. But for Emma, it was never about recognition. It was about the people, the families who now had hope, the community that had found its strength again. Her father's teachings echoed in everything they did: fair wages, mutual respect, supporting each other. These were not just words, they were a way of living. The local newspaper did a special feature. "Millbrook's Miracle," the headline read. But Emma knew it wasn't a miracle. It was hard work, determination, belief in something bigger than yourself. Robert's health was failing, but his spirit remained strong. On his birthday, surrounded by the community he had always believed in, he seemed peaceful, content. Michael spoke briefly, sharing how Emma had transformed not just a business, but an entire community's understanding of what was possible. Tears were shed. Hopes were celebrated. The cooperative now worked across multiple sectors: cleaning, maintenance, community support, training programs for unemployed workers. They had become more than a business. They were a lifeline. As the celebration continued, Emma looked around the room, Jack laughing with new team members, Margaret sharing wisdom with younger workers, local business owners talking about future collaborations. Her father watched, his eyes sometimes clear, sometimes distant, but always, always filled with love. "We did it," Emma whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The room was filled with stories of transformation, of hope, of a community that had refused to be defeated. Robert passed away peacefully 3 months later, but his legacy lived on, in every job the cooperative completed, in every life they touched, in the promise that had started it all. Emma continued their work, not for recognition, not for profit, but because of a promise, because of love, because of hope. Millbrook had become more than a town. It had become a symbol of what people could achieve when they worked together, when they believed in each other, one job at a time, one day at a time, one promise at a time, a new beginning, not just for a business, but for an entire community.